Twitter down, heads up. Okay, it's 1 o'clock, so I think we should get started. Now, I have a lot of material. I usually do this talk in about 1 hour or in 90 minutes or even more. But I want to give you as much as possible. So I'm probably going to have quite high pace in this presentation, but feel free to ask questions. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end of the session for a few questions, or otherwise, obviously, you're welcome to come up to me after or find me somewhere here over a cup of coffee and discuss a bit more about mobile. It's great to see so many people here interested in mobile and apps and mobile web. So I hear this seminar was overbooked even. It's great. So before we get into it, just a few words about me, who I am. So my name is Mathias Strandberg. This is my About Me page. I am the head of digital at Vaitech. And if I just briefly step up to the sales side of this stand here. So Vaitech, we're a digital consultancy with a global reach. And we help companies and organizations develop and make use of internet channel, making website, portal, and obviously a lot of mobile. There we go, that's the sales page. Now, I've had a long interest in mobile, but even more, I'm probably what you would call a tech freak or tech geek. And especially when it comes to mobile, I really love the possibilities we have with these new devices and the effects it can have on our business and the effects it has on us as a society, as a world community, and obviously as organizations in different situations and different contexts. But as you might have noticed from my name, I'm Scandinavian, I'm Swedish, and I grew up in the northern parts of Sweden. And if you're somewhat familiar with Sweden, you know that is Ericsson country. So that was one of our greatest prides back in the 90s, Ericsson making the mobile networks, and that meant also that Sweden were quite early on to adopt internet technology. We had the infrastructure set up quite early in the 90s, which meant it was a great place to be interested in technology because we were sort of early adopters in the 90s. And since the winter is quite bad, there wasn't really too much to do besides playing with devices, playing with old computers, and trying to learn and test new things on the internet. Now, growing up in Ericsson country, Sweden, we have our neighbor to the east being Finland, also known as Nokia country, you might know. Back in those days, Ericsson and Nokia were big players, big global players, so there was a big fight. So if you grew up in Sweden, you had to have an Ericsson phone. Otherwise, that was not cool. And right in the train back, actually last week from Leeds, I saw this picture in the train. Can anybody recognize this phone? A few naughty faces. This was my first mobile phone back in the 90s. This is the Philips Fizz. Released, I think, 94 or something. It was a horrible phone. Big, and you didn't have micro SIM cards or mini SIM cards. You had a credit card SIM card that you had to shove up in the phone, and then it hopefully worked, but that wasn't really guaranteed anyway. So from the start, I was not cool at all having a Philips phone back in the 90s in Sweden. But I caught on and got the Ericssons. I even ventured in and tested Nokia phones, and then obviously 2008. Sort of time changed. We started more or less a new era when Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone, and I was lucky because I had a friend in Chicago that stood in line and actually sent me one just 2 days after it was released, and I was blown away, completely blown away, and I still am. I still am by the possibilities of using mobile. And it's a very interesting age we live in right now because, as you've obviously noticed, more and more people are using smartphones. The smartphone penetration is really going up. It's really quite high here in the UK and also globally, as you might know. So just a quick question. How many in here has an iPhone? Okay. iPhone. Okay. How many in here has an Android device? Yeah, okay. How many have a Windows phone? One brave. Okay. BlackBerry? A few Blackberries, not too many. Okay, interesting. How many of you guys that have Blackberries used as your second device or use your Backup phone? A few, yeah. It's quite interesting because that's probably a quite good representation of how the market looks right now here in the UK. So when I came here, I've been working with our London organization for quite some while, but I've made the move 100% back in October, and I noticed something very interesting. The UK is one of the few markets in the world where BlackBerry actually was bigger than Android. But that was all obviously up until August of last year when it shifted. And it shifted even faster than I had predicted, but the trend is very, very clear. Android is on the rise, iOS is quite stable, but BlackBerry is going away, it's gone. So I hope we don't have any BlackBerry people here in here. No? Good. Thank you. Unfortunately, I think we're seeing the last days of BlackBerry. And I get the question quite often from customers saying that, do we need a BlackBerry app? And the honest answer in 9 cases out of 10 is no, you do not. If your target group isn't young people between ages 13 to 20, they still use BlackBerry to some degree. But even them, they're abandoning BlackBerry for usually cheaper Android devices that are becoming better and better. Just revolutionizing. So, if you're a Microsoft fan, you didn't notice Microsoft on the last slide. So, just to briefly set sort of the stage, iOS has about 48% of the UK. I think this figure is a bit high, actually. I don't think that is entirely true. It's lower than that, but the stats say that anyway. The other ones, I think, are quite accurate. And looking at Android, how it passed BlackBerry and how it's just proceeding. And Windows Phone market share in the UK about 2%. Now, there is some. These figures are probably not exact, but it can give you sort of the overview picture anyway. Now, why is it relevant to know how the market looks? Well, obviously you want to understand your target group. You want to know what devices they have, so you can reach them with your app or whether it be mobile web. And the usual case is that we start with iOS or Android. And in many cases, that is actually all the platforms we do support, because the other ones are just so small compared to it. Even though if Windows are interesting at the moment with the release of Windows Phone 8. I might get back to that one. That's an interesting discussion about Microsoft mobile strategy. But I talked a bit about Android, so even if iOS is biggest right now, I really think that Android is the platform to look at. They have an open platform compared to iOS, which is confined into Apple's little vault with keys and everything. And that means people are using it in many different ways for many different devices. We have hardware vendors starting out in Russia, in China, in India, and Android is the usual. It's more or less the only choice for people that want to get into the world market of mobiles. And this is what I think is spurring on the adaptation and the growth of Android as a mobile platform. Since we have all these vendors in non-traditional vendors in the Western community anyway, but if you're in China, you're very familiar with brands as Huawei or ZTE. I don't know if you've heard about them yet here, but you will. Mark my words, you will. They're building actually quite good devices. They're building them cheap, and they're killing the old vendors like Sony Mobile, unfortunately, even if it is dear to my heart. Sony Mobile, some of the other vendors, they are in trouble. They're in big trouble. So I also get the question, has Android already won? In my opinion, yes. Because they have not stayed with only looking at mobile. Nowadays we have obviously laptops coming out, we have the tablet devices running Android, we have the TVs running Android, it's starting to get quite good actually. We have watches running Android, and if you've seen the news from the World Mobile Congress in Barcelona, I don't know if you have, but Volvo has released a program. They're using Android for the touch screens in the cars, connecting your devices directly. So if you have your Spotify account, you can run it in your Volvo car. Now, other car vendors are also looking into it. Ford has chosen to go with Microsoft, and Audi and some of the other big brands are developing their own platform for it. But I think it's a good move by Volvo to use Android as a platform. Now, that is not to say that this is constant. So right now we are seeing a lot of new vendors coming up, a lot of new software developers venturing into this area of developing an operating system. I don't know if you've seen this, but this is the guys from Mozilla, the ones that do Firefox, the web browser. They have been developing their own mobile OS, and it's being launched now in Barcelona as we speak, more or less. It has been sort of sneak launched already, but I haven't gotten a developer phone yet. I'm a bit disappointed, but I'm going to try to get my hands on one as quickly as possible. But this is interesting because Mozilla are obviously huge advocates of using web technology, meaning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And their new platform will try to use as much web technology as possible. And that sort of leads us into the discussion about apps, native apps, hybrid apps versus the mobile web, and different ways to go about it. First of all, I'd like to set something straight. When we're talking about hybrid apps versus native apps, what do we really mean? So this picture is a bit small, but I'm going to try to explain it. Looking on the far right, we have the native app, the 100% native apps. Now that means we develop the application using the specific code and the SDKs to that operating system. So when we're developing iPhone applications, we're using Objective-C, we're using the Xcode, the iOS SDK, and those apps will only work on iPhones. They can only be deployed on the App Store, Apple App Store. And the same goes for Android. It's Java, and we're using the Android SDK. Microsoft, we're using .NET technology. On the other side of the scale, we have the pure web. So we have your mobile websites. We're going to get back to them in a bit. In the middle is where the interesting stuff is happening right now. What we call hybrid apps, or some people call them web apps. I prefer just calling them hybrid apps because it's easier to understand what we're talking about. And the idea is that we're using web technology and mixing that into native applications that we develop. This is interesting because we can reuse content, we can reuse parts that we develop, and we can have them work in our Android apps, and we can have them work in our iOS apps, or Windows Phone apps, or whatever it might be. This is interesting, but it comes with a few problems here and there. Firstly, looking at the looking at the native side of it. Now, this is an example from an app we developed starting a year back, and it's a site for a company called Cab Online. And what they do is they have a bunch of different taxi brands that operate in Sweden and also some other parts of Scandinavia. And we wanted to make an app that can give people the possibility to, at any place, use their GPS, order a taxi, and also see a fixed price for what that cab ride will cost. Send messages to the driver, and also see updates on that taxi, where it is at the moment. If the guy is saying, I'm 5 minutes away, and we can see him on the map, and he's across town, we know he's probably lying. Now, we tried a few different ways to go about to make this happen, but in the end, using web technology was probably not a good choice, since the downside with that is looking at performance. So if you want the best possible performance, if you want the best access to native features like the GPS, or like the phone, or like other native features, the best way is still to do it using the native SDKs. Now we're going to get back to this, because that is not the entire truth. You can actually do it using web technology as well, but that gets a bit tricky. But to provide the best possible user experience, and to be in 100% control of the user experience we're giving our customers on this phone, there is just no way about it. We have to go native. So once we've done our iOS app, it's up on the App Store, people are using it. We get requests from people using Android, they don't have an app, but they want it as well. So we look at doing an Android app, or perhaps a Windows app, and what we'll find very soon is the interaction schemes on the different platforms are different. So an iPhone user is used to an interaction scheme, an interaction model, so to speak. They're used to the iOS-specific buttons, the look and feel of the iPhone applications. Now this is hard because we can't just copy the interface and deploy it on another platform. It gets tricky because Android users are used to another way of apps looking and feeling and acting. So this means we have to develop, obviously, another interface. We need to develop another code, actually, because we can't use the same code as we use the iPhone. And we have to deploy that on Google Play in this case. When it comes to Windows Mobile, it's an entirely different interaction scheme. Users are used to the Windows Mobile interface working in a completely different, not a completely different way, but in a slightly different way. But enough of a difference, so we probably can't just copy the design and just deploy it on a Windows Phone platform either. So this means we end up with a tricky situation, since if you want to maintain all these platforms, if you want to work, because we need to have people with very specific coding skills on these different platforms to maintain it. And we have some other problems, specifically when it comes to Android. And now I said that I think Android is the winner. However, that is not uncomplicated, since Android has a problem called fragmentation. You probably know the Android phones. They come in all different sizes and shapes. And that means that we need to develop the interface to adapt to that screen size. And here it gets a bit tricky, because they have very small phones and they have the large phones that are almost tablets, looking at the Galaxy Note 2, for example. That is almost a small tablet, more or less. And also you have the different tablet sizes. They vary a lot, and it gets quite tricky if we really want to give the user a pixel-perfect user experience. Looking at it from that perspective, iOS is simpler because you have predefined sizes. Even if the iPhone 5 now is a bit larger, it's not that difficult to actually make it work quite well. That is one of the problems with Android specifically. So, looking at native, we talked about the feature richness. So we can actually access the native features in the phone, like GPS, phone, like light, like camera, like thermometer. Actually, it's quite cool. Like gyroscope. So we can do a lot with it, accessing and developing apps using native features. Looking at the other side of the scale, the mobile apps, the mobile web pages. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but this is an example from this weekend. So I was in town and I didn't really have too much to do. So I posted an open question on Twitter to my friends saying, so I'm in London, what do I need to do? And I got a reply from a friend saying, you need to go to see the Harry Potter studio tour. It's awesome. Be there. Oh, great, I thought. So I Googled it on my phone. I found the link. I clicked on it, and this is what I met. Do we have anybody here from Warner Brothers? Ah, okay. Sorry about this, but okay. Oh, you're not. Oh, good. So this page does not function via the mobile website. Please visit the page through a desktop computer browser. This is not okay. So they lost a visitor on Saturday. I would have gone, but I couldn't find it. I couldn't access the site. I might have been able to find the information another way, but this is the attention span I had. I tested it, didn't work. Okay, I'll do something else. So at this point in time, where we're at right now, we have to be able to cater for our mobile users' need. It is not okay anymore to redirect people or tell them to use the desktop. It is very possible to do it. Now, here comes a bit of big technology, but this is as bad as it gets, I'm promising you. But just looking at the different ways we use to actually build and deploy mobile websites. Looking at a few years back, we had, well, usually you have your content management system for your website. So what we usually did is we set up a separate content management system that specifically catered for mobile devices. This was pretty good. There was a few problems with it. First of all, we needed to have more or less separate editorial organizations to manage big sites. We had problems with cross-references in the URLs. So people couldn't just type in www here and get to the regular web page. It didn't work. So what happened was that many of the CMS vendors, like the ones they can meet out here, they started adapting. They made it possible for us to use what we call device detection. So when a device calls and wants to see a website, we can see what type of device is it. Oh, it's a mobile phone. Okay, we can redirect them to the M domain that you've probably seen on many sites still using. Now that's not a bad way to do it. It still ends us up with a bit of problems because we need to manage that content separately usually. We might need to have a separate editor for the mobile web page, and we run into a bunch of other problems. But still, that is the way that many companies still deal with it. And based on, depending on what situation you're in and what you want to do, that might be still quite okay and a good solution. Now, the new way of doing it, there's a debate in our sort of community, and that is there a mobile web? And I tend to agree with the people saying, no, there is no mobile web. It is too late to talk about a mobile web. We have the web, and that can be used on different devices, different sizes, whether it be tablets, smartphones, or in my car. So we need to adapt to it. So that's when we come to the concept of responsive web design. Now, I don't have enough time to go into detail about responsive web design, but basically, the idea is that we develop the front-end interface, the interface you see, to dock depending on what screen size you have. So content can shift, and we can actually make the site look differently and look relevant for that screen size. That is usually made by setting breakpoints. And looking at the iOS, it's quite easy. So we have the smartphone, one breakpoint. We have the tablet, or two breakpoints actually, because there's a landscape and there's a portrait mode, and we have the desktop. The problem with that is obviously that we have a lot of different screen sizes. There is too many screen sizes to actually make it work 100% perfectly in all different screen sizes. Obviously, we have televisions. People are starting using their browsers in the televisions more and more. They're hooking up their computers to watch the different iPlayers. This is an example from the Swedish equivalent to the BBC. We developed an iPlayer for it and used it only web technology. There was no apps, there was no Flash, there was only HTML5, and made it adopt to all different kinds of sizes, and specifically looked at the TV format for how we can make the site work on that big of a screen size. But the problem with responsive web design is it is hard to get it pixel perfect. Now, in many cases, it will be good enough. It'll probably be great, actually. But remember that it's probably not that easy getting it 100% perfect in all different screen sizes, all different browsers. However, I think it's a good idea. I think we're seeing more and more websites and more agencies like ourselves adopting this, which I think is good, actually, for the internet. The other way of going about it, that I talked briefly about, is the hybrid way. So using some part of our apps or our mobile web apps being web technology, using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and having that work in our different versions of our apps. And a few years back, a few different companies started developing and releasing what they call hybrid frameworks. I don't know if you've heard, but there are vendors like PhoneGap. They have been acquired by Adobe, so right now it's Adobe, but it's still open source and it's still quite good. There are other people like Sencha and a few other, NimbleKit. So the idea is we have our web page, our mobile web page that we develop. We wrap that into a native shell, so to speak, and we can deploy it on the different platforms. And in theory, this is great. We have one web app, we wrap that in with a wrapping framework, and we can deploy it on all different platforms like Windows, Android, iOS, what have you. Which sounds awesome. It's solved. The problem is going back to the discussion we had about us as users wanting an interface that we are familiar with, that we are used to. So when I get an app that is not at all looking or acting as an iPhone app, I get confused. I don't get the perfect user experience. And that is enough right now to make a user do not use your app anymore. For some features, this is very interesting. Some apps might be very basic, might be very simple. You might be able to have the same interface. You might be able to design it so it actually can work across devices. There are many examples of this where it's done quite nicely. We did one looking a year back for Stockholm City Council, for Sweden, and it was an app that was supposed to be a support for people trying to quit smoking. So it's a quit smoking help, I guess, which is quite interesting. So this was deployed using hybrid technology. So the apps are on all of the different platforms, but the interface more or less looks exactly the same. Now, from a user experience perspective, that is probably not optimal, since these things probably a Windows Phone user isn't used to. On the other hand, we could reuse a lot of the technology. We could make it much cheaper, actually, compared to if we were to develop it using native technology on all different platforms. So, looking at the hybrid apps again, it is probably not the silver bullet we thought a few years back. It is still very interesting. There are many new technologies coming out that makes this better, but probably a dull knife, to be honest, right now anyway. So thinking a bit about HTML, hybrid versus native, just trying to sum up. So what you get with native, you get the best performance. You get 100% control of the user interface. You can really control the user experience. You probably get the best performance. So if you want to do advanced renderings or graphics, you need to go native. On the other hand, with web technology, you'll probably get it cheaper. It's easier to actually support, maintain, and develop your apps because you can use the same developers for it. You can use the same developers for maintaining it as well. But it is starting to get quite tricky. And just to completely take a step back once again, we talked about HTML not being perfect. It is really not. But did anyone try the Fastbook? It was a few months ago. So a company called Cincha, and they are also advocates for using web technology. They developed a web app for Facebook, making it with all the latest sort of hybrid technology, and they made it really, really good. So the feeling of surfing the Facebook on this with their web app was actually pretty much more or less a native experience. It was actually great. The problem was, of course, being it worked as long as you used the Safari browser. If you tried it in another browser, you ran into trouble. So we have the cross-browser problem coming up as well when looking at doing really high-end web apps. So in this case, when it comes to Facebook, I still think they need to be native. They will never be able to make a great user experience cross-platform using web technology, unfortunately. I'm quickly running out of time. We'll probably have to take the questions after. I just want to sum up with a few different slides. So, looking ahead, what is really, really important now when we're in 2013 and mobile is no longer a revolution, it's here, but it's an ongoing revolution because it evolves so quickly. We're getting new possibilities every day, more or less. There's this debate going on in our community of agencies and consultants, that is, do we need to adopt our content for our mobile users compared to our desktop users? Some people say yes, because the mobile user is in a different context, they're on the go or they're on the sofa or something. And then there's the other side to it, saying that no, don't restrict people. They want to surf into your website, give them all content. You might structure it a bit differently, but give them all. And I'm one of the people that say give them everything. Give them everything. Don't restrict your mobile users, because you probably won't be able to predict what they actually want, how they actually want to use it, when they actually want it. That is very, very difficult. So the user is really king. And whether it be native, hybrid, web app, you really need to understand your users. That's the bottom line. Go out, meet them, question them, get them in a room, because you won't be able to get the insights about your users sitting in a project room or sitting in your office. Unfortunately, you need to go out there, you need to meet them. You need to ask them what they want, you need to understand. And you need to do it also over time. So it's not about doing it once and then deploying something. I really, really always try to encourage all my customers to get as much dialogue, get as much communication going as possible with users, because they are king. And your future users are not yourselves. the kids growing up today have a completely different relationship to devices like this or tablets. They have a completely different way of using it, and they will evolve and find new ways of using it that we just cannot predict. So that is why it's very important to try to stay in touch as much as possible with our users. Now, I won't have time to go through this, but I will, hopefully I will be able to post this link. This is the customer experience checklist. It's a very good starting point. It's done by a guy, a fan of mine called Bruce Temkin, or I'm a fan of his actually. You can find it. Just Google customer experience checklist and you can find this. This is a very good way of starting to think about how you can meet your users in the mobile experience. Because, as I said, we are right now in a very, very disruptive age, which I think is great actually. Because we see new things coming up all the time. And we have features in these that we haven't even started using in a really innovative way. We have temperature meters. So actually, if I am in a car, I could have my phone monitor my speed, my relative position. It could also monitor light. It could manage the temperature. It could manage acceleration, deceleration. So if I'm driving and my phone picks up a very quick deceleration, it might pick up something, my relative position changing quickly as well. It might pick up the heat going up very quickly. Well, chances are I might have been in a car accident. So why not let my app automatically send an alarm to the police or the ambulances, everything. The possibilities are already in these devices. We just haven't built those apps yet. So I'm going to skip one example. You can find it in my presentation later. It's really cool about how a company have built very simple piece of hardware connected to smartphones to have diabetes patients not being forced to carry around their big devices and measuring their blood sugar. It's a really good example of innovation within mobile. But I just want to sum up. So the question was apps versus web. I think the question is probably not relevant because it's not really about apps versus web. You need to have a mobile web that is working, that your customers can access and can use. You might have featured services that are suitable for doing as an app. Well, do them as an app. But don't discourage, don't discard the mobile web. That needs to be up and running as well. We've passed the point where it actually is a question about mobile versus web. Now it's about finding the possibilities where apps are useful, where mobile web pages are useful, and how we can service our customers as best as possible in their different situations. So, unfortunately, no time for questions. I've already run over. I think the guys are looking at me. I should wrap up. My presentation will be available. I'll probably send it out later, and it will be available through TFM&A. If you have any questions, send them on Twitter. Find me later. Let's have a cup of coffee. Thank you so much.